This is the very first plant I planted in my new garden. Hi, I'm GardenerScott, and I discuss everything gardening so that you can become a better gardener. Join me today as I discuss the very first plants you should plant in your garden. This is the very first plant that I planted. Back there is the second plant, and though you can't see them, this is the third and the fourth plant. It's still the middle of winter for me, so all these plants are dormant. And it might surprise you what it was that I planted before anything else in this garden space. This is a currant bush, as is this one over here. And these two plants that you can't see are rhubarb. I'm not suggesting that you need to plant currant and rhubarb as your very first plants, though they are great if your climate allows. What I'm suggesting is that you look into the future. What is it you want to get from your garden? If you're a vegetable gardener, you're probably already growing or planning to grow tomatoes and peppers and cabbage and all those other things that we find in vegetable gardens. But why stop there? Have you thought about fruit and the options that you have beyond just the vegetables that are growing during the summer? That's why these are my very first plants. They will provide fruit, different options in the kitchen. Behind me, right here, are strawberries. The rhubarb and the strawberry go together to make great strawberry rhubarb jelly, or pie, or any other manner of desserts. The currants fall into that same category. I use them a lot in desserts and jellies. That's why I've got them growing in this particular space. Whether you choose to grow currants or rhubarbs or strawberries really isn't the point. The point is to think about the concept of time. The currant bushes, they're going to take at least 3 years until they give me a substantial harvest, enough to make more than just a couple jars of jelly. The same with the rhubarb. You shouldn't harvest rhubarb in the first or second years. So it's going to be that third year before I can even harvest any usable stalks. This bed, as soon as I built it and filled it with soil, I put in a hardy kiwi and a grapevine. And on the other side, I've got another grapevine and another hardy kiwi, because it's going to be years before they start growing up this arch and then produce the harvest that I'm seeking. I'm anticipating the future. And these plants were put in the ground first, for me, last year. And now, as this next season approaches, they've already got 1 year in the ground, which puts me even closer to that magic 3-year point. I'm not suggesting that you don't grow all those wonderful vegetables in your first year, because as soon as I built these beds and filled them with soil, I had plants in them, spinach and radish and all those other vegetables that I could grow late in the season, because I got a late start when I moved into this house during the summer. This back bed, it's filled with garlic, because that was perfect for the time of year that I was putting plants in the ground. But more important, the plants that take a long time were already in the ground when I was sowing the spinach seeds. Another reason why these are the type of plants you should put in first is because they don't require fancy raised beds. Most of them are going straight into the ground, so you can get them in right away without a lot of special preparation. This is my beginnings of a raspberry patch. Now, I'm planning on raising the level of the soil in most of this surrounding area, bringing in good soil, making my own good soil. But I started with just a simple raised area. This area for the raspberries is about 6 inches above the basic soil level. They're establishing themselves. They're in place. And the rest of the soil and the rest of the mulch will catch up with the plants. But because they're already growing, as they start to spread, which is what I want my raspberries to do, now they'll be able to spread into an area that I've prepared for them. And I'll be able to do that this year. I couldn't get to it last year. So put them in place, anticipating how the rest of the garden is going to look. I did the same thing with these 2 rows of blackberries. The individual plants were planted in mounds that are about 6 to 8 inches above this base level. I got them in place so they can start getting established. And now this year, I'll bring in more soil to be able to fill in the space in between. And then I can build the trellises that I'll need for these blackberries as well. You don't have to put all those pieces in place. You don't have to build your trellis before you put the plants in. Get the plants in, and then get to the rest of the structures and the rest of the plants that will be in your garden. Here's another example of prioritizing your plants. Here's 2 more currants. You can see I like currants, and they balance with the ones on the other side. I got them in place as a priority because I was running out of soil and mulch. So I didn't finish filling this little raised bed area. But these currants are in place, and they're growing. And now this year, when it finally warms up and I can get back in the garden to get some good work done, I can finish filling this bed. And these plants are another year older. This is especially important if you're planning on growing some fruit trees in your garden, because it might be as long as 5 years before you get some fruit on those trees. In my last house, in my last garden, I had 3 fruit trees, and I knew exactly where I wanted them to go. The problem was my backyard had a really steep drop-off, so I knew that I needed to build a retaining wall system and then bring in some soil and get that whole area built up. Well, once I knew the level that the finished soil was going to be, I put my trees in. And in that first year, I had the trees growing in just big mounds in my backyard, and it dropped off dramatically after that. It took a number of years for me to finish my retaining wall system and put in all the soil and mulch and other plants and finally sit back. And by the time I had all of that done, the fruit had already begun to show up on those fruit trees. If I had waited until I got all the walls in place and all the soil put in, I'd still be waiting. This concept, especially with fruit trees, does mean you have to come up with a plan for your garden when you're first getting it established. Right here, this is the first fruit tree that I've put in, and the only fruit tree at this point. I'm going to have paths, I'm going to have fancy borders, I'm going to have flowers surrounding it, but they're not in place yet. The tree is, and it too is raised up about 6 inches because I'll be leveling this entire area with the soil I bring in and the soil I make. But at least it's got its start. So this year, when it begins to leaf out, it'll start growing in a space that in the future will have a nice bench and will be beautiful, because I know that's what my plan is going to develop into. It's clear that I have a garden plan and a vision for what I want this space to look like. And that was the very first step, was to develop the plan and figure out what plants I wanted and where they would go, general location. That made it real easy to start putting in these plants because I had the vision, I had the plan. And that's what you'll need to do when you're creating a brand new garden space. Don't worry so much about building the beds first and then filling them with spinach and tomatoes. Start thinking about the big picture and years ahead. Do you want fruit in addition to your vegetables? Develop that plan and start putting in the individual pieces right away. And it's not just fruits that you should consider as the first plants in your garden. Like rhubarb, asparagus takes about 3 years before you can harvest it. And this will be my asparagus bed. Now, asparagus should be planted in early spring, but I didn't move here until summer, so I couldn't put it in last year. So this year is my first opportunity to plant asparagus, and I'm taking advantage of it. This year, in this bed, the asparagus is going in, and it's going to be 3 years before I can harvest. The plants that you plant first are first as they relate to the rest of the structures and plants in that particular area of your garden. I added mulch to these 4 squares in this center of my garden. And in this space, I'll be growing gooseberries and honeyberries and more currants. They'll be filled with fruit. I've already ordered those plants, and I'm going to be putting them in as soon as they arrive in another month or two. This space above me will be the center of the garden, a big, beautiful garden pergola. But I'm not waiting until I build the pergola to put the rest of these plants in, because I want them growing. By the time the paths and this center sitting area is complete and I can actually enjoy and rest a little bit, maybe I can also just reach over and grab a ripe gooseberry. The specific plants that you grow first are entirely up to you and what your climate will allow. You might be too warm to be growing apple trees and currants and a lot of these other plants that really like that cold period to establish for the next year. These are the plants I like. These are the plants that I know will take a long time, so that's why these are the plants that I put in first. What do you like? What would you like to grow in your new garden or in an area you're expanding in your old garden? And identify those particular long-growing plants. And that will help you determine which ones you need to put in before you finish with the structures and the rest of the plantings. And once you've identified that and you have those in place, it really is amazing how fast the seasons pass. And by the time you finally get it all built and you sit back, you'll be very thankful that the very first thing you did was to put in a plant that takes 3 to 5 years to give you the fruit that you wanted all along. What have you done? What are the first plants that you put in? And are you growing any of these fruits in particular? Let me know below. And especially for those of you that are in warm areas, what are the options that you have for warm weather fruits? If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more garden videos, subscribe to the GardenerScott channel and do click on the bell. And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and share it. I'm GardenerScott. Enjoy gardening.